So good day, friends. This is Dr. Bob Hamilton, and you have tuned in today to the Hamilton Review, where kids and culture collide. Every week I say this, but I want to say thank you for making us part of your week. I know that you guys are all busy people, and you do what you do, taking care of kids, grandkids, trying to keep your families together, which is a full-time job. And the fact that you tune in means a lot to me. So thank you. I bring to you amazing people. The reason I want you to be happy and come back and share this is because I bring amazing people to you. And today is really no exception. Today, my guest is Allie Beth Stuckey. She is prolific. She's written one book, now another book, which is coming out in a month. We're going to talk about that book. It's called Toxic Empathy. We'll tell you how to get a hold of that a little bit later on. But before we get going, Allie Beth Stuckey, welcome to the Hamilton Review.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So let me tell you a little bit about who my guest is today. She is the host of the Blaze Media podcast, Relatable. And on that podcast, she tackles theological, cultural, and political issues from a conservative reform perspective. She speaks to college students, Republican organizations, Christian ministries, and businesses across the country about the importance of biblical and conservative values. She also offers frequent commentary on Fox News. She and her husband have a daughter, and I think now 2 children. Is that correct?
3.
3 kids.
Yep.
Okay, so
Yeah.
you had 1 daughter in 2019. Number 2 was born when?
2021, and then number 3 was born 2023.
Okay, so you're
Yeah.
in the family groove. This is fabulous. And by the way, I want you guys to know that I met Allie Beth at a conference in Utah, in Deer Valley, a month or 2 ago, and that was and she was one of the keynote speakers, by the way. And as I was sitting there listening to you speak, Allie Beth, I said, I want this lady on my podcast, because what you say is, first of all, incredibly clear and amazing. So before we kind of talk about some of the issues we're going to talk about today, I want to back up in your life, because you weren't always an author. You weren't always a podcaster. You weren't always talking to, conferences. You were a little girl somewhere. And would you mind telling us a little bit about your story leading up to what you're doing today?
Sure. So I am the youngest of 3. I've got 2 older brothers that are quite a bit older than me. And then my parents were entrepreneurs. And so I was always around people who are a lot older than me. They kind of took me along as the youngest child to a lot of the conferences and the meetings and the different business events that they had. My grandmother also lived with us until I was 13. She was a teacher. My mom was a teacher. I was around a lot of really good communicators, really good educators, people, again, who were older than me and kind of held me to a higher standard of conversation communication. I also just have always loved to talk. I think that's just something that comes naturally to me. I've always loved to read, I've always loved words. And so there is a way that I could say, at least retrospectively, that I've always wanted to do what I do. I have always loved history, English, math, and science were never my thing. That's what I always wanted to focus on in school. I've just always loved to talk. I've always loved making friends, and I've always loved having complex things explained to me in a way that I can understand, but also explaining complex ideas to other people in a way they can understand, at least to the best of my finite ability. And I had the blessing of going to a Christian school from kindergarten through 12th grade that had a heavy emphasis on theology, on critical thinking, on writing, on research, on literature. And so that was a huge blessing, a huge foundation for me, in addition to what my parents gave me and my grandmother gave me just in our home. I went to college, I studied communications, and then actually gave the commencement speech at graduation 2014, not because I was valedictorian or anything like that. I just wrote a speech. It was selected by this committee. And I remember when I gave that speech, I just thought, this is what I want to do. I don't know how, and I don't know what it looks like. I didn't have plans to do it. No one was asking me to go speak places, but I remember, and I think I will never forget that moment of looking out into the crowd during graduation and thinking, I feel so alive. And this is what I want to do forever in one way or another. So I'm sure we can get into the conversation of how
S-
all of this kind of unfolded, but that's the big
The
picture,
big
fast
picture.
track view.
So
Yeah, of how I
you
came into this
you got
world.
into it, and you're not afraid to get in front of a crowd of people. That is, by the way, a gift. Most people, if you talk about what are the things that terrify people the most, getting in front of a crowd of people is one of the highest on the list. And I think
Yeah.
you're very well know that. Correct?
Yes, that is true, and I appreciate you saying that, and yeah, it's a gift that I can't take credit for myself because, of course, it helps with practice over time, but I do think that that's just a desire and kind of a confidence that God gave me a long time ago.
That does require confidence. You have to be able to be willing to get up there and not really concern yourself about what is everybody thinking about me, because if you fall into that groove, you get very
Yes.
uncomfortable. And by the way, everybody in the audience knows that you're uncomfortable. Did you know that? It's really true.
Yeah, right.
So you are doing a lot of things, and I want to first of all, I want to ask you a couple questions about the book that is coming out. You have written a book, a new
Yeah,
book, which is entitled Toxic Empathy. The subtitle is How Progressives Exploit Christian Compassion. Um,
yeah,
maybe you can start with a couple questions, couple of things. Number one, empathy. You say that empathy is one of the misused. They people call empathy the highest virtue, the highest value that anyone can have is empathy.
hmm,
Can you kind of debunk that
yeah.
idea and also talk about this idea of how we, certainly in the Christian world, our compassion is used kind of against us? So take it away.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. This word and concept of empathy, I have seen weaponized, especially against Christian women. I noticed it the most during the culture wars of 2020, whether it came to COVID or conversations about social justice. Empathy was weaponized as a tool of manipulation to get people, I say especially women, to be on the progressive side of an issue. And how it typically goes is if you are truly empathetic, then you will be a progressive on immigration, on abortion, on race, on justice, on gender, on sexuality. Because in order to truly be compassionate, you have to affirm someone's choice. You have to be in alignment with the progressive perspective on a certain topic. And while it can be beneficial to put yourself in someone's shoes, which I would say is the definition of empathy, not only feel for them, but to put yourself in their position to be able to feel their pain and feel their experience as they have lived it. That can be a powerful tool to love someone, to understand someone, but it is not actually our highest virtue. It is not synonymous with love. It's not synonymous with compassion. Feeling the way someone else feels isn't actually in itself good or bad because feeling how someone else feels can't tell you what is true. It can't tell you what is right. It can't tell you what is good, which is why we as Christians who serve a God who says that he is love, 1 John 4:8, have a responsibility to distinguish between empathy and love. We
Yep.
have to define our terms. That's important in all situations, but especially when we're talking about these huge subjects that are typically referred to as political topics like abortion, but really they're moral, theological topics. We're talking about an issue of life and death for the most vulnerable people in our society. It's really important for us to distinguish between empathy, which is just feeling how someone feels, and love, which is something that can only be defined by the God who is love. And he does define it in 1 Corinthians 13. And love has many characteristics, but one of them is that it always rejoices in the truth, never rejoices in wrongdoing, but rejoices with the truth. So that means for the Christian that love and truth are inextricably intertwined. Love and truth always go hand in hand. So if I am to love someone as the God who is love defines love, which we as Christians are called to do, it is not enough for me to just feel how they feel because how someone feels is not necessarily grounded in truth. It's not necessarily grounded in reality or morality, it can't necessarily lead me to make the right decisions. Instead of just asking myself, how does that person feel? That's one question to ask. But the more important question to ask is, what is true? What is right? What is good? So in this book, I'm trying to shift the paradigm. I'm trying to change the lens through which we look at these big culture war, if you want to call them that, topics like abortion, gender, marriage, immigration, away from just, do I feel empathy for this supposed victim, to how do I best love the people around me without abandoning what God's word says is true, which takes more thought and takes more work and a lot less superficial feeling. But that is the shift that I'm trying to create through this book, Toxic Empathy.
So let me get into a particular issue. Okay, let's talk. And by the way, friends, these are issues I don't talk about always on my show, but I think it's important to really kind of sit down and go through them. I want to talk about abortion because abortion is a hot topic issue. Certainly in the election we have coming up in a very short time. I think that your show is going to air about a month before the election, so this is very relevant. Abortion's on the table. And I,
Yeah.
I will tell you, Allie Beth, that at one point in my life, I was pro-choice. And I was pro-choice because I think I was kind of erring on the toxic empathy side of the curve. And I kind of looked at it and said, listen, choice is, first of all, I like the word choice. It's a good word. It's a positive word in my mind. But also, I was unschooled. I was uneducated. I didn't really know what I was choosing. And so
Mm.
as I got into my medical career, and I'm a pediatrician, you know that, I spent time in the intensive care unit, neonatal intensive care unit at UCLA, and I began to understand, first of all, these little babies who were 24, 25, 26 year weeks gestation, who were these micro, we call them micro preemies, is what we call them. I looked at them and said, these kids, these little babies are human. They're alive. We're struggling to keep them alive. And it was at that point in time that I made a change. And I said, listen, it was very difficult for me to really proclaim myself as being pro-life, but I am pro-life. And I
Mhm.
want to, and I think that you're knocking against this idea of what is true. Yes, it is true that there are women who are in a terrible situation, and it looks like abortion is the only answer. I'm going to stop there, and I'll let you kind of take it from there.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate you sharing that perspective. And a lot of people can relate to that, including myself. And I say this actually in every segment of the book. I talk about how I erred on the toxic empathy side of things. And so this is not just a book of me preaching at women, hey, why don't you just stop feeling this way? It's a book of like, I get it. I once imbibed the media narrative that the victim in any abortion story is actually the woman. And that's the victim who I need to focus on. And what does she need? What does she want? What's her choice? Her autonomy. Now, I would not have said that about myself. I was a Christian. I would have called myself pro life, except for I said, well, I believe in all these different exceptions, which is essentially, a pro choice position until someone challenged me actually on social media. And so sometimes the pushback that we respectfully give to people on social media can be effective. This person said, what's the difference between a baby conceived in rape and a baby not conceived in rape? And basically, what this person was trying to articulate is the humanity doesn't change. And the truth is, I wasn't looking at abortion from the perspective of the baby. I wasn't looking at abortion from the perspective of the human life that's actually being taken when we're talking about this topic. I was still looking at it from the perspective of the person that the progressive media was telling me is exclusively victimized in this situation. Now, should we, of course, feel compassion for both the mother and the child? Yes, we should. But we need to recognize that when NPR or the Washington Post or these more progressive outlets, when they're talking about abortion, they're trying to get you to only have empathy for one person in the situation, and that is the mother. They will completely obscure the existence of this unique human being with unique DNA that should be entitled, because of its humanity, to human rights, the most fundamental of which is the right to life. They will completely get you using what I call toxic empathy to ignore that child and only focus on affirming the feelings and the fear of the mother. And what I argue is that, well, that's not the Christian position. Christians have to be thinkers, Christians have to be compassionate, and Christians have to be loving. And again, if love is inextricably intertwined with truth, then we have to look at what is abortion? What is abortion scientifically? What is it medically? What is that life inside the womb? And then we have to look at it theologically. If we know that scientifically that life inside the womb from the moment of fertilization has its own DNA and therefore is its own distinct human being, then theologically we know because that baby is a human, that baby is made in God's womb. That's an ensouled human who matters to God, and therefore killing that baby at any stage is murder. And of course, God forbids murder. So when we look at it from all the different perspectives, we even go into in the book like the history of abortion, which is really, really dark and really eugenic and really demonic when you really get into it. And then we just look at it from a biblical perspective, like even outside of politics, if you want to just even exclude that part of the conversation, that's how Christians have to be thinking about it. It's not just toxic empathy for one party. It is, what is abortion and what does the truth and love call us to do and say?
So that was the thing that tipped me is I went to an abortion. And I didn't know I didn't even understand it. I was told I was doing my OBGYN rotation, and the chief resident who was there at the time was kind of parsing out where the medical students would be going. And he said, Hamilton, you go to the tab, TAB. And I go, okay. And I didn't even know what a tab was. A tab means therapeutic abortion. And what they do is they take out the products of conception. Now, products of conception is another euphemism, which means the fetus is what it means. The child who has and by the way, these are not exactly zygotes. They were one day of age. They're weeks of age, and they look like little human beings at that point in time. So I was going to go to this TAB. A tab, and I was going to see the extraction of the products of conception. I remember being in that room and thinking, oh, this is an abortion. They didn't say that word. And I was thinking, and I remember going in there, and it was really solemn. There was no joy in that room, I can tell you that. And I saw what happened, and it's pretty intense. I mean, we're talking about, a vacuum being put into a woman and suctioning out the products of conception, which include the placenta and the child who is in that womb. And it was like boom, boom, happened very quickly, done, and that was it. I remember feeling very dark. I felt in my spirit, and is a very weird thing. I know it sounds kind of kooky, but I remember thinking just this heaviness and I looked at the woman and I don't think she was super happy either, obviously. And I had looked at the doctors and they were just kind of doing their business. It was almost like, okay, we got to deal with this. And I thought there were two people. There was a person that wasn't there. There's no longer alive that came into this room half an hour ago. And there's a little person who's no longer here anymore. And I've carried that for my entire life, to be honest with you. And I think that what you said is very critical, Allie Beth, and that is we have to actually know what's going on, because a lot of people do not understand what actually happens. They kind of talk about this in euphemistic ways, products of conception, TABs, and things like that, which mean nothing to us. And we kind of hush the reality of what actually does happen. I've seen it. I can't say I've seen it a lot of times, but I saw it once, and that was enough for me. But I can tell you that there is something very profound and distressing when you actually get down into to what it is. Last comment I'm going to make, then I'm going to turn it back over to you, and that is that there is money involved with this thing too. You always have to follow the money, because there's money and there's pressure. And some of that pressure is coming not from the woman who is pregnant, but actually from her boyfriend or her husband, saying, you need to do this. And so we need to kind of look at the bigger picture of why that decision was made. Sometimes that is obscured, and we don't want to talk about that because, we talk about money, that's a bad thing. Talk about pressure from a man, that's also a bad thing too, right? So It took me a while to kind of come to the conclusion I've come to, but it's pretty clear in my mind.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're right. I mean, there's a profit incentive there. Obviously, Planned Parenthood, the number one abortion provider, makes a lot of money from abortion, and Planned Parenthood is also a huge funder of many politicians in this country. And Planned Parenthood, different local Planned Parenthoods work with, for example, the National Institutes of Health, which is funded by our tax dollars, scientific experiments where they use the body parts of aborted children and experiment on them for different procedures and different mechanisms that are supposed to be for our health and well-being. And so there is a whole profit driven incentive structure, unfortunately, when it comes to child sacrifice. And that's really what it is. You mentioned the use of euphemisms. That's a really good signal, whether you're talking about abortion or anything else. It's a really good signal to let you know who is lying and who is telling the truth, who's doing the wrong thing and who's doing the right thing. If the truth hurts your side, you're probably not on the right side. If you can't be blunt and honest and use plain words to describe what it is you're defending, then you're probably on the immoral side. There's a reason why, as much as the pro abortion side says now, this didn't used to be this way, but they want to unapologetically shout their abortion for any reason through all 9 months. Gone are the days of safe, legal, and rare. As much as they want to say that they are completely brazen and unashamed of their view, they will use euphemisms all day, every day to describe what they believe. Terminating a pregnancy, pregnancy contents, contents of conception, as you said, even fetus, even though it's used in the medical world, and that's fine, it is also used as a euphemism, as if it's not Latin for small child. And so, if you have to use euphemisms to make your position palatable, you're probably on the wrong side. Whereas on the pro life side, all we have to do is tell the truth. That's all you have to do.
Yeah.
Tell the truth. What is an abortion? What is scientifically life inside the womb? That's how you know you're on the right side. That is also, by the way, how you gain confidence in defending your position. Just tell the truth.
When I have this conversation with people, I ask the question, "What is it?" And this is a question that they will never answer. Anyway, I'm curious. There are several things. There's so much I could talk to you about, and I know that our time is somewhat limited today. But listen, one of the things that you share with people is the 5 lies that women believe today. And by the way, Allie Beth, her ministry, what she does is mainly to women. This is a gal who speaks mainly to women. Is that correct? The people who go on your Instagram and come to your lectures are generally female. Is that correct?
Yes, I never want to exclude though what I call the Relatable bros. So those are there are men who listen to my podcast, and I would say they're probably 20-25%. They're super important and I care about them a lot. But yes, it's mostly women who are in the Relatable audience and who are reading my books.
Okay, and I want you to know, as a man who listened to one of Allie Beth's lectures, I can tell you that they're compelling, and so
Thank you.
they do translate into the male world. I promise you. But you have one topic you mentioned is there are 5 lies that women believe today and how to debunk them. So I'm watching our time. You can blast through those 5. What are those 5 lies, Allie Beth?
Sure. So that was my first book that came out in 2020. That's You're Not Enough and That's Okay, Escaping the Toxic Culture of Self-Love. So kind of the theme of both of my books is going after, I think, the most nice sounding lies that even Christian women can find ourselves falling into. And really I took aim at this kind of self-love, self-empowerment, self-help culture that uses some Christianese to get women into basically worshiping ourselves in the name of Christianity. Rather than denying ourselves, taking up our cross and following Christ, we're worshiping ourselves and telling ourselves lies like, you are enough, you're perfect the way that you are, you determine your own truth, you're entitled to your dreams. These are some of the lies that women are believing that I debunked in that book. And I could go through all of them, but really the premise is that God made us not enough. He made us insufficient. We do have all of these feelings of anxiety and inadequacies and insufficiencies and insecurities and all of that. Those are real, but we're told by the world that the answer to all of those problems can be found inside of ourselves. That if we take this journey of self discovery, we'll find this perfect inner goddess that we can liberate, that has been restrained by the patriarchy and society and unmet expectations and religion and our relationships. And finally, if we just free ourselves of all of those things, then our perfect goddess will come out and we'll learn to love ourselves perfectly. And when we learn to love ourselves perfectly, then everything will fall into place. We'll be able to manifest all of our dreams and goals. And sometimes this takes on a Christian form of like, that's what God wants for us. We're almost entitled to name and claim those things. But the truth is, that's not the gospel. We are not our own gods. We are not the solution to our problems. If all of the problems that we have are found inside of ourselves, we're not going to find the solution to those things in the same place that we're finding the problem. So the solution to all of those inadequacies and insecurities that we feel is not our own enoughness, but Christ's sufficiency. He died because we are not enough. We're not enough to save ourselves. We're not enough to sanctify ourselves. We're not enough to strengthen ourselves. We need less of ourselves. We actually need to love ourselves a lot less and fill ourselves with God's love. Our self love is superficial, it changes based on our moods, based on a million different things. But God's love does not change and it does not wax or wane. It's a lot more reliable and a much better source of confidence.
Well put. You you talk about things, Allie Beth, that are controversial and that kind of fly in the face of the culture. Yeah, and there's a lot to talk about. I love the way you put these things. Let me ask another question. This is one of the things that you frequently do. You ask the question: how do we engage those with whom we disagree? Because there are a lot of people out there who I'm sure send you a lot of, and I hate to use the word hate, but pretty much hate mail. Do you get that stuff? And how do you deal with people who really look you in the face and say you're full of it? So how do you
Yeah.
how do you handle that? Because you've got to have a pretty tough spine because you're dealing with some real issues here.
Right. Of course, there are people who just disagree with me and who are respectful about it. And I don't put those people in the category of trolls or haters or anything like that. I appreciate that. Appreciate respectful, constructive criticism, critiques, and disagreement. I can't engage with every single person who disagrees with me, but I don't, you know, I don't fault those people for having their disagreements. That's fine. I think when you do engage with someone who is respectfully disagreeing with you, I think curiosity and defining your terms are two things that can really help you, two tools in your tool belt. Making sure you're on the same page, have the same fundamental definitions of the words that you are using when you're having a discussion, but also hearing their side, being curious about like what they're saying, why they're saying it, and then offering your perspective can really help you gain rapport with the person. It doesn't mean that you have to compromise. A peace does not mean compromise. Peace does not mean agreeing with someone necessarily. I have friends that I disagree with politically. Sometimes we wade into those conversations and sometimes we don't. My goal is to plant seeds with them in every conversation. It's not necessarily to change their mind in every conversation. So see that as a marathon, not a sprint. That's what I would say about that. Now, for the trolls, for the people who, of course, are vicious, everyone who has said anything online has received the vitriol of hateful people. Those people used to bother me a lot more than they do now. I kind of just block them and try to ignore them. But I think having such a strong support system in my family, not only my husband and our family, but my parents too, and even my in laws, they're all such huge supporters and encouragers of me and what we do. And so I have a great system behind me. Of course, my church and our friends, and they keep me grounded, they keep me rooted, they remind me of what really matters, and the love that I feel from them so far outweighs any of the dumb comments by any of the trolls and haters. So I think that, and of course, um, my faith and belief, and also just like what I say and the calling of what I do gives me a steel spine. Not a perfectly steel spine, but um, enough to do what I do.
No, you're doing a great job, and I think that anybody who puts their toe in the water is going to get a lot of pushback. I think that anyone who's doing anything of any meaning definitely gets pushback, and the cancel culture is actually pretty powerful out there, as you well know. I'm sure you've been canceled by different people in different situations, but you're still fighting on. And I think that what I love, going back a little bit to your answer before, is I love truth. I love truth, and I think that that is the thing that motivates me. That's the thing that causes me to want to do what I'm doing in this podcast that I have. And you have your own podcast, which I think you're trying to push out truth as well. And truth is something that I have to say, and you may or comment on this. Over the last couple of years, I've come to a couple of situations where I'm not totally sure what is true anymore. Institutions that I found that I believed in, things like the FDA, the CDC, the American Academy of Pediatrics, some of these institutions that I grew up with, and FBI, CIA, I could go on and on. I look at them and I kind of go, I thought that I put my faith in that these guys were telling the truth, and I suddenly began to kind of, I'm wondering now. But anyway, I do believe that there is ultimate truth. Have you had that same problem, by the way, Allie Beth, with what is true in the world?
Yeah. I mean, I think 2020, the last few years have really rocked a lot of our trust in these institutions and experts that we felt like we could really rely on. And it's really forced people to ask really good questions, though. It's forced us into critical thinking. It's forced us into our Bibles and into our churches to search, okay, what is true? And in a time of cultural chaos and change, the biggest comfort to me is Hebrews 13:8, that Jesus Christ is the same yesterday, today, and forever. And how gracious of God that He has revealed Himself to us, that He has given us wisdom and clarity in His word. And really, the beauty of like all these questions that we have in this crazy culture war that we're engaged in today. What is a woman? What is a marriage? What is a human life? Do these things matter? All of them are not only defined in scripture, they're defined in the very first chapter of the first book of the Bible. Genesis 1:27, God made them in His image. In His image, He created them, male and female, He created them. So, right there, we get the definition of human life, why it matters. We get the definition of gender and the definition of marriage. God knew that those things were so fundamental, so foundational, so important that He literally spells it out for us in the first chapter of the Bible. So if we go from there, if we just read the first 3 chapters of the Bible, we already have a very good, very solid, very stable foundation for what truth is.
That is where I get my truth, by the way. Thank you. Yeah, very well put. Okay, we're
Yeah.
going to leave our conversation there, but a couple things. First of all, how do people get your new book, which is coming out?
Yeah.
Fire
Yeah,
away.
they can just go to toxicempathy.com. Toxicempathy.com. It's out October 15th. And you can go ahead and pre-order that wherever you like to buy your books. There's also an audiobook that's read by me. If people prefer audiobooks, that's available on Audible. And they can also go to alliebethstuckey.com for any other information that they're looking for. My Instagram, my social media, my podcast, all that good stuff. They can just find alliebethstuckey.com.
Well, listen, I've loved this conversation. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy day to spend some time with the Hamilton Review. People are going to listen to this and
Thank you.
They're going to be moved. So thank you, Allie Beth. Best wishes on your new book. I'm going to go out and order it and read it. And
Thank you.
I may have to knock on your door again to talk about this book as well. So be well.
Yes, sir.
Have a wonderful day, and we'll see you soon. Okay. And friends,
thanks so much. You too.
You're welcome. And friends, thank you for tuning into the Hamilton Review today. Until next time, be well. Bye-bye.
You have been listening to the Hamilton Review, where kids and culture collide. Thank you for allowing us to be a part of your day. Tune in again next week on Apple Podcast. Rate and comment and tell a friend.